Well, it's not very nice to see an American president who's so loathed by European publics. It makes it harder for the United States to accomplish its goals overseas when political leaders in our allied nations, they have to answer to their publics. And as you see, there's tens of thousands of people on the streets of London. Donald Trump's approval ratings are not very high across the rest of the continent. So if he wants our European allies to do things, if he wants them to spend more money on defense, which they should be doing, if he wants Germany not to construct this pipeline with Russia, which is also good advice, the Germans should not be doing it. It makes it harder for the U.S. to achieve these goals when our president is so disliked. And it makes it harder for us to cooperate. It makes it harder for him to cooperate with other leaders in Europe when they have to answer to their electorates who can't stand him.
I don't know. Is that true, James? It feels like he has made progress. Ivan, excuse me. He has made progress on the point of boosting the defense budgets from Europe and is now, including Prime Minister May, going to bring them to the table talking about this German pipeline.
Well, I think he's harping on the pipeline is not a good idea. I mean, he said that Germany gets 70% of their energy from Russia, and it's about 9%. So I think he's overstating that. But I really think we have to, decide what our goals are. And I'm not sure what Trump is doing here. I guess he's transactionally trying to get a better deal, as he always does, by getting the allies' defense spending up. But of course, it's been rising. George W. Bush laid the seeds for it. Obama got them to start rising their defense budgets in 2011, so it's been already occurring. Now, of course, some of this is smoke and mirrors, and a lot of times the Europeans will say they'll do it and then they won't do it or whatever, because you have free riding problems within the alliance. The problem is if you're the top dog in the alliance, which we seem to want to continue to be, you're going to see free riding by the allies. So Trump is sort of other presidents have tried this and they've been successful to some extent, but you're not going to get a 4% increase, as he was saying. I mean, we don't even spend 4% of GDP on defense.
James, it's Evan Newmark. Let me ask you a question going back to what I would describe as your kind of negative or your implication that the public in Europe, that the politicians have to listen to the public. If you go back to Ronald Reagan, if you go back to George W. Bush, they were not welcomed with open arms by the European public either. I'm not suggesting that Trump's got the same style as those two gentlemen. But the truth is, 20,000 people in a protest in London, that's not that big a protest for London. I lived in London for 10 years. There were much bigger protests. So maybe Trump is not necessarily having as negative an impact on the public's imagination as the media would like to suggest.
Well, you go back in Germany in the early 1980s, there were 400,000, 500,000 people protesting Ronald Reagan and protesting the deployment of missiles to West Germany at that time. So yes, this is a long relationship. There's long been anti-Americanism in Europe, and I do think a lot of people are exaggerating the costs of what President Trump is doing. But what I think is different about President Trump and his predecessors is that there wasn't those presidents who were unpopular. They never really challenged the fundamental values of the Western alliance. At the end of the day, Ronald Reagan certainly and George W. Bush, they understood the value of Europe, of the transatlantic relationship, of the EU, of NATO. This is the first time we have an American president who's come into office who completely opposes these institutions, who calls NATO obsolete, who supports the dissolution of the European Union, who wants to see Europe break up and tries to encourage it whenever he has the chance, who's openly pro-Russian. So, I agree, there's been anti-Americanism throughout, and I don't want to exaggerate the role of public opinion in foreign countries. I think it's often exaggerated. But at the same time, we need to understand that President Trump really departs from the tradition of the American presidency.
Final word, Ivan. What should we expect between the meeting between Trump and Putin?
Well, I would hope he would bring up the election. He says he's going to, but I kind of doubt it. And I think that, he really ought to bring it up, and we ought to have more sanctions. I'm not a big fan of economic sanctions, but in this case, when a foreign country meddles in your election, that's going to the heart of democracy. And I really think we need to either attack them in the cyberspace in some way. I know that's a little dangerous, or put more sanctions on them, because certainly we haven't put enough sanctions. We want to deter them from doing this again, and I really think Trump ought to mention this. I doubt if he will, but or if he does, it'll be, you know, with a wink and a nod. But you know, that's very key. I think the other things that Russia has done, I'm not so worried about. I don't think they're a real big threat. Their GDP is the size of Italy, and the European countries have a much larger GDP than Russia, and even spend much more on defense. And I think they can start doing more to defend themselves. I support Trump in trying to get them to do that.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.